few weeks ago, five former HMI sat down and had an informal chat about how they were inducted, how they were trained, and actually gave some insight into perhaps how the new chief inspector should be appointed. And believe it or not, quite a few people were interested in that chat. So when I put it up on YouTube, we got quite a lot of coverage. So we've decided to come back again, and we're joined by an additional colleague, Adrian Lyons, who'll introduce himself in a minute. And what we're going to concentrate on today is why do we think that Ofsted's got into the position it has? And more importantly, how can it get itself into a better place? So we're going to spend about 30 minutes. I think it's probably worthwhile just to say that we're colleagues rather than friends. We know each other professionally, but we're not sort of out having meals with each other. So we come from different perspectives on all of this. And none of us know what each one is going to say. So hopefully it's a fresh discussion for you. So we'll go to Adrian Lyons first. Adrian, can you just introduce yourself because you weren't part of the previous discussion?
Okay, so I'm Adrian Lyons. I was an HMI for a little over 16 years, from 2005 to 2021. So I've seen quite a few HMCIs come and go. During those 16 years, I had various positions in Ofsted, one of which was national lead for economics, business and enterprise. But perhaps more relevant to this conversation is that I was the convener for the FDA union that represents nearly all HMI for several years. And as you were talking in the last session about the system for induction and mentoring that HMI used to have, I was an officially accredited Ofsted mentor for 4 years. So yeah, had a number of enjoyable jobs within Ofsted, but in the most recent years, I found myself increasingly out of kilter with the predominant ideology.
Well, interestingly, my brother, who was also was an HMI, was the FDA convener in Wales. So I think used to hear a lot of differences between what was happening in England and what was happening in Wales. Interestingly,
just very briefly on that, one of the things that happened during lockdown, during the pandemic, was that through the FDA, the conveners for the different inspectorates in the UK got together and discussed things on a fairly regular basis. So it quickly emerged how different Ofsted was to the other inspectorates in the UK.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's go around. Meena, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, Meena Wood. I was an HMI from 2002 to 2014. Like Adrian, I sort of also worked under some interesting HMCI. But I moved from the post-16 division, which was prior to 2005, to schools. And did a variety of inspections, including ITT, Young Offenders Institute, so prison education, I don't know, career service, and schools inspections as well, of course, predominantly featured there. And I think the most enjoyable part of my work in Ofsted was conducting what we call the thematic surveys or the subject surveys, but actually we featured more on thematic surveys, which looked at, for example, achievement of disadvantaged pupils and so on and so forth. And that was really, really enjoyable, as well as the monitoring inspections that we did of schools that were in special measures or RI, or satisfactory as it was previously called. So yes, that's me.
Thank you, Meena. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Price Grimshaw. I joined HMI in 2001 in the teacher education division, as it was then. So for the first part of the time I was there, I was mostly inspecting teacher training providers. And then 2005, like everybody else, moved largely into school inspection. I left Ofsted as HMI in 2007, but I actually carried on inspecting as what was then an additional inspector, is now Ofsted inspector, until 2012.
Brilliant. Debbie?
I feel like the Fox Cub of Ofsted. I did just under 2 years as an HMI, and I left Ofsted in 2015. While there, though, as we discussed before, one of the deep joys of being part of Ofsted as an HMI was the wide range of experiences I gained with regard to inspection of all sorts of settings, including ITE. And I think that's one of the things perhaps we should be talking about this morning in the first part of our conversation.
Brilliant. Adrian Gray.
Well, I began in Ofsted as an HMI in the School Improvement Division, so working with schools that had failed their inspections. Then I had a couple of years in London leading on school inspection guidance and policy, and then a few years also in London leading on evaluation and research. And I also worked on the European body, the Standing International Conference of Inspectorates, and I've written a book called European School Inspection and Evaluation, which is much more interesting than it sounds.
I can vouch for that, having bought it myself and read it.
Well, I'm glad you've read it, Frank.
I did. And I was an HMI from 2001 to 2012, and I'd done quite a lot of inspection before that, but I got involved in framework development, and then I moved into being the CEO of quite a large multi-academy trust. So that's our background. Let's quickly get into why do we think that things are in a bit of a mess at the moment. Who wants to kick that off?
Well, I've got a nice quote here, actually, that I think sums it up. It says, "It is because inspections achieve so much that we can move to a system that emphasizes self-assessment and makes a more direct contribution to school improvement. At the same time, we need to, and we can, lighten the burden on schools, release money from the front line, and increase the focus on safeguarding children." Now, that quote comes from David Bell, the Chief Inspector in 2005. And I think it's the fact that none of his predecessors actually were aware of that quote or were told about it. That probably explains so much as to what's wrong with Ofsted.
Yeah. I think also for me, because that's quite a framework quite dear to my heart, was that this was that actually the reason for it wasn't so much about saving money, it was about just trying to show that the inspection and the response of schools had changed over time. You know, that it couldn't just continue doing the same old, and that there was more confidence that schools were able to self-evaluate carefully themselves and give them the chance to present themselves more to inspectors. But yeah, and after that, it seemed to morph into something else. You know, the reduction in the scale and the resource going into it was then kept the same or even reduced further as it then morphed back into the sorts of framework that that was being delivered prior to 2005. So, and all of the austerity years that went with that as well was driving that. But anybody else got a view as to why?
I'm always keen to pontificate, Frank. So I'll stick a couple of things in for people to comment on. Firstly, I think there's a perennial problem with Ofsted. It can't decide who reports are for. So they produce these reports which nobody reads. They're sort of informed on the impression that parents are simple-minded and want a very quick summary, but actually doesn't tell anything about the school, and they're useless for professionals. So Ofsted's lost its ability to impact on terms of highlighting the fantastic schools because nobody trusts the reports anymore. So it really needs to sort that out. And the other thing that's definitely gone wrong is a good idea done badly, I think is how I would see the current framework. It was a good idea to broaden the focus across the curriculum. It was essential because we'd had 10 years of doing nothing but English and maths, to be honest. But it was then done by people who plainly didn't think about how it would work in schools and the effect that it's had in terms of inexperienced primary subject leaders being put under the cosh. It doesn't work in smaller primary schools. It works better in bigger secondary schools. Anybody with knowledge of schools and inspection would have predicted that would happen. And actually, in a way, the safeguarding issue has diverted us away from the real problems with the framework. as a result of which nearly all schools are good or RI, and we've lost both ends to an extent. So it doesn't actually work anyway. So that's two things to get you started.
One of the biggest problems for me at the moment with the framework is, and it exactly reflects Adrian's perspective, which is that it feels like a kind of quasi-intellectual gravy train.
Yes, absolutely.
And I find myself having these Kafka-esque conversations with primary subject leaders, using the term subject leader loosely. And I feel their pain so much. I also worry at the moment, and I keep seeing this during inspection, that we have inspectors, including HMI, who apparently have been told to, quote, ignore outcomes evidence. Now, I'm not sure the average parent or the average year 11 or year 13 or indeed year 6 student would not be bothered about outcomes. And we seem to have lurched from, as Adrian said, a system where maybe outcomes were given too much weight, particularly given the incredible flaws at the heart of our outcomes system in England. But actually to be told to ignore that information and the ability of leaders to actually articulate the outcomes journey their pupils are on is just intellectual bunkum. I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers.
Can I just come back on that very briefly, because I've probably the one here who's had the most recent training from Ofsted, and I think that is a bit of a misinterpretation. I agree, Debbie, that is the way some inspectors are interpreting it. But actually, if you take Ofsted's model of what's your curriculum intent, how well is it implemented, and what's the impact, you can't then divorce outcomes from the impact. So, yeah, Amanda Spielman's absolutely right in saying that schools have become so good at training pupils to jump through hoops to get through exams that we needed to take the entire focus off outcomes and look more widely at the curriculum to achieve the goals that Adrian Gray was talking about. But I think one of the problems is that training has been quite superficial, and people have taken away superficial messages. One of which is we're not interested in outcomes; we're interested in the curriculum intent, and that's the end of it.
Well, but when you read the reports, what they go by is how much knowledge do pupils have. Yeah. So they've substituted an Ofsted made-up outcomes system for the national system.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's random whether they think pupils know enough bits of geography or whatever.
Yeah.
Julie, I'm trying to bring Meena. Sorry, trying to bring everybody in here.
Can I just say, I think I agree with you, Adrian, in terms of what inspectors take away. And I think Debbie's got a really valid point there about what, they've been told to ignore. I've had that from head teachers who've said to me, that's what they've actually offered outcomes as an impact of their curriculum. And the inspector has said, no, we don't look at that. We just look. And then Adrian Gray's point about, it is about knowledge, knowing more, remembering more. And that's what they keep looking at, and the sequencing of, how that's being taught. For me, the bigger worry now is the complete absence of focus on equalities. So whilst we may be looking at a curriculum and how it, let's look at what's happening in the classroom in terms of curriculum sequencing. So what it's not doing is actually addressing those thousands of children who are actually persistently absent from school, who are missing out on that curriculum, and what's happening to them, and that figure's increasing exponentially. So persistent absence, the ghost children that they keep talking about, children who are excluded, and children who are disadvantaged, or even SEND children. It's very perfunctory now. So I just think the curriculum is not, it's about asking that question. If you're looking at curriculum, I think it's brilliant. We are, of course, I would, but is it appropriate for those children? Not what Adrian was saying, knowing more, remembering more. That's not the question Ofsted should be asking. Is it appropriate for all our children? If it's so appropriate, why is behaviours in schools, why are those getting worse? Why is persistent absence getting worse? And why are exclusions rising? So it does beg the question, and why also, for me in particular, being my bonnet, is why a lot of schools now, academy trusts, are using selective testing. So a school local to me here, which is an outstanding school twice now, is now 40% of the children who come in are done on selective tests. Now, that's not a grammar school, that's an academy, part of an academy trust. So I think there are a number of issues there around equalities and the provision that's right for the local community and the provision that's right for all the children who are attending the school. And I think you can only, to be honest, I would prefer to go down the road of looking at curriculum, but also looking at outcomes, because you quickly see which children are achieving and which children are not. And then you can ask the questions about your intent and your implementation and so on. For me, that's the biggest missing thing. But I also want to make Adrian's point, I think it was Adrian, who said about safeguarding becoming a real distraction. Is that right? Was it Adrian Gray?
Well, yeah, I think in terms of the public critique of the framework, that's attracted all the attention, but actually numerically it's a tiny issue compared to the problem with the curriculum.
Absolutely. But I would envisage a framework where that had a separate grade, to be honest, to the quality.
Separate it out, the regulatory bit.
To the quality of the provision and the outcomes and so on, because the safeguarding has to be, I mean, only yesterday they were talking about vaping and how now that's going to become schools' responsibility under safeguarding. Now, how do we then manage, you know, that these vapes and how children are now using more and more of these vapes in school? So how do you now police that in schools and bring it under safeguarding? It will have an impact on leadership again if they're not doing what they should be doing. So I think separate the two out. That's it. And also, I don't think you should publicise the grades to the world at large. You can publicise a series of grades, but not a single grade. That really is a misnomer, because this school that I just mentioned, which is my local school, which is outstanding again, has the biggest problems with bullying and behaviour and exclusions. But that is not looked at during inspection because they look at the curriculum. So to my mind,
if you have a grade, you've got to publish it because of FOI. People will find out anyway.
Yeah.
No, I think they need a series of grades, but not one overall grade. I think that would be more sensible because, as I said, this particular school, you know, behaviour is not that good, but the whole thing's outstanding. So I know it's a local school where the children are bullies and they're real vandals. I know because they wander around me and me. So
tell us your postcode later, Meena.
Yeah.
Okay. Come and visit, Adrian. Come and visit.
Julie, just before we move on to the future, then, your perspective on why they've got into this position.
Two things. The first thing is the notion that I feel towards the latter part that I was with Ofsted, and that was anybody can inspect anything. You know, you don't need to be a specialist. You can inspect anything. And I'm going to be very honest and say that I was put in situations where I wasn't comfortable, because I just didn't know enough. And there was this idea that I think is there now, because we see secondary specialists who've got zero experience of early years going in and saying crazy things to early years people. We've got to get rid of the idea that anybody can inspect anything. I think it's just not that simple. And then the other thing that's got us where we are now is that in a really good organisation, you think like you've got a framework, and then after a few years, you say, right, how's that going? Let's take what we've learned from that and build a better framework. And then, what's happened in the world? Like, we've had a pandemic. Well, when we do this, do we need to consider that? Framework, as far as I can see, just more thing that was an opportunity for somebody to put forward their particular bee in the bonnet. So where it started in 2005, the idea that we've got to get schools to be good at self-evaluation, which is where I am now, because nobody wants their school to fail. They want to get better and better. But, you know, we had this thing where, and I found some reports I'd written the other day from 2007, I think, you had to identify specific threads because we were told, and Frank, you will know this, you cannot fit a Section 10 week-long inspection into a Section 5. You know, that's where we got pretty quickly. And now we've got this awful, awful framework where there's, you know, people are asking, you know, 11-year-olds what they did in art years ago and basing grades on this sort of nonsense. The idea that anybody can go in and inspect an entire school, no matter how many's on the team, in 2 days or 1.5 days, and issue a single grade that determines the careers, the path of that school, is crazy. That's what is wrong, is people tried to do too much in too little time. The frameworks didn't learn from each other. And I agree, the reports are worse than useless. The reports are an embarrassment, I think.
Okay, well, let's move. It's quite encouraging to hear so much positivity about that 2005 self-evaluation approach, but I'll take that. But let's move forward about the future. You know, so has anybody got a view as to what should happen now? You know, to push, in a sense, Ofsted, and this is around schools. We're just focusing on schools and colleges. How we move that forward to get to a better place.
There's a rather beautiful article written by Professor Colin Diamond in a recent Schools Week, where he takes some of the DFE's own research around different jurisdictions' inspection arrangements and makes various helpful suggestions as to what we could learn from those jurisdictions. And I know Adrian Gray has experience in this regard more than I do. I do think we have become, for all sorts of reasons, terribly insular in our approach to the evaluation of the impact of our education system. And we hide that behind PISA performance and OECD data and think everything's rosy in the garden when it probably isn't. So I think that would be a really useful starting point for the new HMCI to actually immerse themselves in what international evidence is telling us around effective school evaluation.
I'd like an HMCI to be appointed from outside England. I think that's what we need.
Yeah.
It does feel very chummy. I think we've got into, I mean, for me, there was somebody, I think it was in the Times or something a few days ago, somebody wrote or copied a letter, was it from a former chief inspector who basically was going back to Ofsted's role or the inspectorate's role to hold, you know, to be clear about things that have worked and things that haven't worked. And actually, I think they've got themselves into a position where they don't report on the stuff that really everybody should be concerned about. You know, I don't read that Ofsted saying, well, actually schools are underfunded.
Exactly.
You know,
yeah.
I don't read any.
Primary hold people to account, including the government.
Yes.
And if they did that, then they might have more credibility with schools as for doing the same thing.
Absolutely. The irony of that comment about school funding is that HMCI was asked about that by the Education Select Committee very early on in her reign, and she refused to answer because she didn't have the evidence. Well, since then, not having the evidence doesn't really seem to have been a barrier to her. But I think that actually there's a danger of us all being nostalgic for the past. But there are things that Ofsted did a lot better in the past. When I was appointed in 2005, my job title said Her Majesty's Inspector, Managing Inspector of Schools. And what that meant was that I had a local authority, all the inspection activity within a local authority area, I was supposed to monitor and discuss with the DCS about where the strengths and weaknesses were, etc. So that more hands-on local monitoring role is something that would be a good thing to return to, as well as absolutely returning to the fact that Section 5 inspections, as we've already said, were not designed to be Section 10 inspections. So something much smaller and much tighter and more focused on school self-evaluation would be a way forward.
I do think as well, speaking as a former Academy Trust CEO, two versions of, I'm really worried about the lack of accountability for certain elements of the Academy Trust system. And it's not being resolved at all, actually, for all sorts of reasons, one of which is I do think the current HMCI is not speaking truth to power in the way that perhaps previous HMCIs have done and were employed to do so. And therefore, it would be really good to see the new Chief Inspector really thinking about that, because if we think about the combination of school inspection and external audit, those two avenues are not producing the evidence that we actually need to really know how the trust system is working and the impact it's having.
Yeah,
We
Can I
need a
chip-
different
go-
way of
go on, Adrian.
appointing HMCI then, don't we? Because it's become too political.
Yep.
And the chair is a political appointment as well, and that is also a problem.
and the board is a problem as well.
Mm.
You know, I think it's interesting. The board, Ofsted's board, just sort of sits there. You know, most people don't know who sits on it. You know, and what it does. You know, that needs to be much more transparent.
HMI
interesting,
have no idea.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting after the pandemic, when there was so much turmoil and so much work done by schools, really that basically became so crucial to the survival of some families, that the Ofsted's view that we should just park that now.
Mm.
You know, we're going to give very little credit to the schools for that. We're back. I think that was a critical moment when Ofsted lost the goodwill of some of its leaders and thought, well, actually, you're not reporting on what you're seeing. You're reporting on what you want to see. And I think that was a really poor moment. And I think people just sort of thought, well, what the hell is all this about? You know, that for me was a moment when actually I think the difference between what it used to be and what it is now was highlighted very sharply, I think.
That is spot on, Frank. And there was I just want to throw into the pot one idea for improvement that will be incredibly controversial, and I'm not sure it'll be at all welcome, but because I'm going to suggest that inspections should be much more frequent. Obviously, not more resources needed to do that, so it's a big issue. But I think the other issue, as well as Ofsted not necessarily being relevant to what's most important for schools, the other issue is that it's such high stakes. And if it was more regular and routine, rather than this big every so often event, that would make it less high stakes, I can't help thinking. And in order to be able to achieve that, you probably need some sort of peer review arrangement on a more local basis that's then quality assured by HMI.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was thinking, actually, because we get people now, teachers inspecting for Ofsted for all sorts of reasons, which some of them are not articulating at the moment. But I think having with peer review, everybody can benefit. If we're looking at establishing a system where school leaders work with each other, they're good at self-evaluation, they've got an external person supporting them with that, and they've got maybe HMI overseeing the thing. I think, you know, we've got an idea for a way to go forward.
I think that's a really attractive suggestion, Julian. It would build on. There is some fantastic peer review practice within the trust sector at the moment. So the best trusts are not only doing it kind of internally, but also working with other trusts in that model. And that will truly, done well, build great capacity. If that were moderated by a cadre of HMI, that could be a really powerful way of moving the country forward.
I think
Absolutely.
it was really interesting, the sort of range of work that all of you referred to about your jobs as HMI. When you compare that range of work and insight that you gained as an HMI, that's so different to the experience of your, they say jobbing HMI, but you know, the recently recruited HMI just does not have that range of experience. And I think for me personally, that range of experience widened my understanding about what education provision was like in the country. And I was then able to sort of hone that down into making, you know, when you had to make some judgments, you know, that was a lot easier. I fear for those who are now HMI have only got sort of like experience from, say, 2 or 3 schools. They might be exceptionally able schools, but actually that is such a narrow view, viewpoint really to take into an inspection. So I think that there's a lot to be gained from just your summary of your experiences as an HMI and the opportunities you had to what they've got now. So we need to do something that, I think, like you, Adrian, I think it needs to be, perhaps it could be more if it was less intense and it was more around a dialogue about how to help those schools improve. I could live with that, because, you know, I'm not that keen on more loading up more inspection, but I suppose it is what type of inspection, you know, and who gets to find out about it. You know, not every visit should be reported to parents, surely.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, the fundamental issue is that we've got an inspection system that was basically designed 30 years ago for a very different landscape, where there were a lot of ineffective schools around. Ofsted's own data now shows that there are very few ineffective schools. So we've got a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The problem is we don't know which those ineffective schools are until we go along and inspect them. So therefore, it has to be a universal system, and matching that up in some way. Okay.
Well, before we finish, because I know we're a little bit tight for time this morning, anybody got any sort of humdingers that they want to throw in before we bring it to a close?
Can we get away from people going on, if we think about moving to a system where people don't go on Twitter to say, well done, our school is now officially good. There is nothing that irritates me more than that. If your school's good, then why not be posting stuff about the fantastic work you're doing? It isn't, your life doesn't rest on Ofsted coming and giving you the stamp that you should know already.
So I think I would just say, Frank, for me, then on the back of what Julie just said, it's not about approve, it's about improve. And that's the difference of inspection, isn't it? Which everybody's been saying, a developmental role rather than a rubber stamping, you know, we now approve of you for the next however many years that you are now officially outstanding or good. I think that would be, so is that the main message we're taking away from this? Is it moving towards a development?
Well, I think so. I'm just waiting for Adrian. He looks as though he's just about to burst.
I mean, the model is still 30 years to go, in the sense that it's still based very much on the visit as well. We have played around with risk assessment ways, but, you know, I can remember 10 years ago having discussions about doing online pupil surveys as a way of getting information about schools. That never happened. And yet now it is so easy to do that sort of thing. And actually, if you want to know about a school and whether pupils are safe, what they think about their lessons, that's what we should be doing. We could be running those, and then the ones that come out really well or really badly, then you inspect them. Why have we not moved into the modern world? We still have this old way of only the inspector seeing something counts.
Yeah.
You know, when we do our little surveys, we find out fantastic detail about what kids on different year groups think about their school, and it's absolute gold dust in terms of actually knowing who to go and talk to. It's so easy. Why haven't we done that?
And actually, a number of multi-academy trusts are doing that.
Yeah, there's all these adolescent surveys and things that LAs do. But Ofsted, no.
Well, thank you all very much for your time this morning. And who knows, there may even be a third edition. I'm not quite sure what it'd be about, but I have to say I've found the discussions and the chat.
Fiscal policy, Frank.
Anyway, we if there is, it may be about government fiscal policy, but who knows? But thank you for watching, and I hope it's helpful for you in your school or as a parent, you know, to get a better understanding of why Ofsted is where it is and perhaps where it may need to go in the future. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, colleagues, and it's goodbye from us. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Goodbye.